My grandmother put greedy preachers in their places twice, even after she died. How much do you think a lifetime of devotion is worth? 1 cent, apparently. But my grandmother had the last laugh, and her revenge was sweeter than any sermon. I never expected my grandmother's funeral to be the start of a scandal that would rock our entire community. For as long as I could remember, Grandma Evelyn had been the backbone of Whispering Pines Church. She was the kind of woman who'd drive all night to fetch forgotten supplies for a youth retreat, or spend hours cooking for the congregation without ever taking credit. Evelyn's dedication to Whispering Pines was unwavering for nearly 5 decades. She taught Sunday school, organized fundraisers, and always had a kind word for everyone. Her faith was as strong as her work ethic, and she truly believed in the goodness of her church family. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. When Evelyn was 73, a car accident left her homebound and unable to attend services. You'd think a church would rally around one of its most devoted members in her time of need. Instead, silence fell like a heavy curtain. For 10 long years, Evelyn reached out. She invited her pastor, Reverend Hawthorne, and his assistant, Pastor Green, to visit. She called old friends from the congregation. The response? Crickets. It was as if Evelyn had vanished from their memories the moment she couldn't serve them anymore. As Evelyn's health declined further, she decided to plan her own funeral. She wanted it held at Whispering Pines, one last chance to see the place she'd given so much of herself to. When she called to arrange it, Reverend Hawthorne was too busy to speak with her. Pastor Green eventually showed up, but he wasn't interested in funeral plans. "Remember your church in your will, Evelyn," he kept saying, barely disguising his greed. "Lay up your treasures in heaven." My grandfather, a retired steelworker and ex-Marine, had to physically remove Pastor Green from the house. For the first time in my life, I saw my unshakable grandmother break down in tears. Evelyn, ever the fighter, rallied and lived another 6 months. When she finally passed, we held her funeral at the local community center. Not a single person from Whispering Pines showed up. The real fireworks, though, came a few weeks later at the reading of Evelyn's will. Our family gathered, as was tradition, to hear how Grandma wanted to be remembered. To everyone's surprise, Reverend Hawthorne and Pastor Green were there too, practically salivating at the thought of a big payout. As the lawyer read through the bequests, the pastor's anticipation grew. The amounts got larger and larger as he went down the list. Finally, he reached their names. "Before I read these final bequests," the lawyer said, "Evelyn left a message to be read aloud." What followed was a blistering indictment of Whispering Pines' hypocrisy and neglect. Evelyn detailed how she'd originally planned to leave 20% of her estate, a staggering sum, to the church. But their treatment of her in her final years had changed everything. And now, the lawyer continued, the bequests: to Reverend Hawthorne, 1 cent; to Pastor Green, 1 cent; to Whispering Pines Church, 1 cent. The look on their faces was priceless. But Evelyn wasn't done. The final bequest was to Hope Outreach, a charity run by a predominantly black church across town. It was for the exact amount she'd originally intended for Whispering Pines. In that moment, Evelyn exposed not just the greed of her former church, but its underlying racism too. She'd supported Hope Outreach in secret for years, knowing Whispering Pines would never approve. As the pastors stormed out, red-faced and sputtering, I couldn't help but smile. My grandmother, even in death, had managed to teach one final lesson about true faith and charity, and she did it all for just 3 cents.